I personally love religions. Like I've studied religions both academically and also just out of personal interest. So I do love religions. I think there is immense amount of truth in all the religions that I've studied, especially the world's great religions, the ones that have large numbers of people. Yeah. But they obviously, there's difference. There's a lot of dovetailing. I mean, there's a lot of things that we agree upon, but there are differences. So in the Islamic tradition, we're a supersessionist religion. So we do believe that Islam came and abrogates the previous dispensations, but it acknowledges the previous dispensations. If there's differences, it's because they've been changed or altered. That's how the Muslims view it.
But Christians as well. And yeah. They just had one less to
deal with. Right, exactly. But the Abrahamic tend to, the Jewish and the Jewish tradition believes in the Noahides, right?
Yes,
but their mandate is to teach, the Noahides for the rest. So the 613 is for them, but the 7 is for everybody else. Right. It's a lot easier. But the Muslims actually believe that all peoples had prophets. All peoples. The Quran is very clear that there's been no people except they had messengers sent to them. So there are remnants and traces of prophetic tradition all over the world, which is why you have a lot of these themes and a lot of the morality. I mean, there's differences, but there's a lot of similarities. So we believe that we acknowledge the previous dispensations and also the Muslims have traditionally allowed them to coexist with them in Muslim states. So the Muslims always protected the Christians. I mean, there are periods, they're bad periods, but by law,
it's absolutely true.
Yeah, by law they had to. But I mean, there's bad rulers. Like we had a ruler in the 11th century in Jerusalem that burnt down the Church of the Sepulchre, but the ruler right after him rebuilt it, because it was just an act of madness. So, and the Christians historically have lived with the Muslims. There's 12 million Christians in at least 8, I think, but closer to 12 in Egypt. The Coptic Christian church was protected, even though they were persecuted by the Byzantines. So the Muslims have recognized that. The Jewish community, Bernard Lewis wrote a book about how much better Jews fared in Muslim lands than they did in Europe.
Yes, for sure.
It wasn't perfect.
That was a low hurdle.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, and it certainly wasn't perfect, but there are periods of great collaboration between the scholastics amongst the Jewish and Muslims. And then also in India, there's some bad periods, but there's also periods where people like Daru-Shakoo, the great Mughal prince of Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal, he actually translated the Upanishads into Persian. And the Upanishads are really consistent with Islamic teaching. Muslims, any Muslim that read the Upanishads would feel like they were reading Muslim commentary. And he actually felt the Upanishads were mentioned in the Quran, Daru-Shakoo. So the first translation of the Upanishads into European language in English was done from Persian, from a Muslim translation of a Hindu text. So I think Muslims have been taught to respect religions, but we do believe that Islam superseded the previous dispensation.
So let's follow that. The dispensation we were talking about was obviously the Hebrew Bible, and then the Christian dispensation, which changed that in their perspective, and then the Islamic tradition did that. But how then did the Islamic tradition deal with other non-Abrahamic religions? Right. Because there was nothing to supersede, in a sense, if you're dealing with Hinduism or Buddhism.
Right, and a lot of Muslims considered Hinduism, we can't assert it because it's not mentioned in the Quran. The Quran does mention lesser lights, distant lights, and so the Muslims, many of the Muslims felt, like Al-Baruni did a whole study of Hinduism, and in fact, one of the great Esfarayini, in his book on heresiology, actually has a whole chapter on Buddha, which I wrote about. I have a article called Buddha in the Quran, and he makes an argument that he said if what the Buddhists say is true, then he's Al-Khidr, which is the green man who's mentioned in the Quran, and Buddha is often portrayed in green jade. In any case, I have no problem believing that these were revelations and dispensations. I mean, the vast majority of Hindus believe in one God. You know, a lot of Muslims think they're idolaters, but a true understanding of Hinduism is actually they believe in this ultimate. I mean, they have the Trimurti, you know, the idea of Brahma and Vishnu and Shiva. So.
But if the Muslim tradition says that each peoples have their own prophets, the assumption is those prophets are saying some things that are not accurate or not
well,
true?
They spoke for their time, so sometimes it's cultural. Their laws would differ, but the ultimate truth of one God, the prophets speaking through that one God, or you know, avatars or however you want to call it, and then the idea of a judgment. That these would be considered fundamental beliefs.
Is that good enough to make it? Like the Noahide laws from the Jewish point of view would give non-Jewish people, if they fulfill that, really kind of the same thing.
And it's an easy ticket, 7, not 613.
Right. So
on the train bound for glory.
So, but does in the Islamic tradition, how do you then view the other traditions who didn't become Muslim but maintained either the old dispensation?
The Quran says in the 5th chapter that we have given every people's a shari'ah, a sacred law, and a minhaj, and a way of methodology to follow that. And had we wanted, God would have made all of them one. So vie with one another in virtue. And so there's a kind of withholding. Like, we do believe that we have superseded the previous religions, but we recognize that there's a wisdom in that God has left these religions in the world. And we are not allowed to force them to become Muslim. They become Muslim with their own choice. And God will judge them on the day of judgment. I cannot say, if I say you're going to hell, I've done a sin. I cannot say that. I can say that to no individual. I can say that to no individual as a Muslim.
But yet, as a Muslim, you do believe that the only certain way you'd be 100% sure they'd be in paradise is being a Muslim.
A true Muslim.
A true Muslim.
Yeah. Not the true Scottish fallacy. I don't like that fallacy. You don't know that one? Right. The true Scotsman fallacy. You know, it's like, the Scottish man's reading in the newspaper that somebody got raped. You know, he's a Scotsman would never do that. And the next day he finds out it was a Scotsman. He said, well, a true Scotsman would have never done that. That was one of those.
Good.